Lebanon's president has named a new administration sidelining Hezbollah for the first time in decades. But where does this leave the group and its allies who've long played a major political role in the country? And will this move usher in what the Prime Minister calls a government of reform and salvation? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. Lebanon has formed its first fully fledged government for the first time in more than 2 years. Now, its newly appointed Prime Minister must oversee a devastated economy, fractured political coalitions, and a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah that expires later this month. Hezbollah has been left out of the new administration after the US drew a red line. And the group has lost its veto power, known as the blocking third. So, can Hezbollah remain a political force? And will the departure and shift in political landscape bring about reform? We'll examine these questions with our guests in just a moment, but first a report from Laura Khan.
With the words, "Reform is the only path to salvation," Lebanon's new Prime Minister formed a government for the first time in 2 years. Top of the agenda are the economy and reconstruction after last year's war between Israel and Hezbollah.
The government must ensure security and stability in Lebanon by fully implementing Resolution 1701, enforcing the ceasefire agreement and pursuing Israel's withdrawal from every last inch of Lebanese territory. This must go hand in hand with reconstruction.
But Hezbollah and its allies, who have long dominated Lebanese politics, have been left out of the new government.
After Hezbollah has been significantly weakened due to the events in the recent months, this reflection of this balance, of this change in balance of power, is you can mainly see it because now the Hezbollah and Amal duo do not have a blocking third in the cabinet, which they had used for several years in order to obstruct the work of the government.
Hezbollah has been militarily weakened by Israel, but still has popular support. The US had been pushing to keep the group out of the new administration.
Everyone in this government who is committed to an end of corruption, who's committed to reforms, and who are committed to making sure that Hezbollah is not a part of this government in any form, and that Hezbollah remains disarmed and militarily defeated.
In late November, the US helped to broker a ceasefire to end the fighting. A deadline for Israel and Hezbollah to pull forces from the south has been extended to mid-February. Lebanon has been under mounting international pressure after facing years-long political and economic turmoil.
We are now in a phase of rebuilding this country. Not only did we face a war, but also a financial crisis and many other crises. Now everyone should be working together to build the country and keep outside intervention on the sidelines.
The new cabinet will now have to draw up a policy statement, which will need to pass a vote of confidence. A government that may not please all political parties, but one that aims to bring stability where it's much needed. Laura Khan for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring in our guests. In Brumana in Lebanon, David Wood, a senior Lebanon analyst at the International Crisis Group. In Genova, Italy, Lorenzo Trombetta, a senior analyst for the Italian news agency ANSA. And in Beirut, Elijah Magnier, an independent military analyst who specialises in the Middle East. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all. Elijah, let's start with you. For so long, a dominant force in Lebanese and regional politics, is Hezbollah facing an existential threat?
Well, yes. But we have seen this new government where the Shia are omnipresent. There were 5 ministers selected and approved by the Prime Minister, the President, Amal, leader, that is the Speaker, and Hezbollah. So Hezbollah has suggested and supported non-affiliated ministers in the Lebanese government in the past, while Hezbollah itself has directly held ministerial position since 2005. It has also backed independent or allied figures to represent its interest without being officially labeled as Hezbollah members or direct affiliated militant. So this tactic has allowed the party to maintain political flexibility. And in many governments, Hezbollah was present. And in this government, Hezbollah is also present by agreeing on the nomination of these 5 ministers. However, it doesn't mean that nothing has changed. On the contrary, there is a change. There are reforms. There is a dynamic that is completely different today. The Hezbollah doesn't have a strong Christian ally as it used to be in the past, and Israel is still occupying part of Lebanon without any visibility that's going to withdraw on the 18th of this month. So yes, there's still danger. The reconstruction is not sure, is not confirmed that any party or any government is going to put money on the table or invest directly, and so many refugees are still without home.
David, what do you make of that answer? How much influence over the new government do you think Hezbollah will have? And what problems could he cause for the government?
So this is a really important point that you make. And while it's obviously true that Hezbollah is no longer a dominant player in the new government, it's still a significant player. And with its ally, the Amal movement, it has participated in selecting the new finance minister, which is a very important post in any Lebanese government, because any action the government wants to take, which involves public expenditure, needs the signature of the finance minister, creating an effective veto. So that is something that in successive governments, Hezbollah and its allies have clung to, making sure that they lead the selection of the finance ministry, and it's for this reason. But at the same time, as Elliot mentioned, there's a real mood of reform. There is no blocking third, so no single faction has the capacity to threaten to bring down the entire government. And also, what Hezbollah has conceded in this new government is selecting all 5 Shia ministers. Now, in the past, Hezbollah and its allies, in 2006 in particular, said that because all Shia ministers had resigned, that the government no longer had legitimacy to continue under Lebanon's power-sharing conventions. Now, in theory, given that Hezbollah and Amal led selection on only 4 out of the 5 ministers, it could be a situation where even if the duo asked their ministers affiliated with them to resign, that nevertheless the government could continue with 1 extra Shia minister not aligned with the parties.
Lorenzo, I'm going to get Elijah in a moment to talk about what's going on within Hezbollah at the moment, but we can fairly safely say that it is facing internal overhaul at the moment and restructure. With a weakened Iran and an anti-Hezbollah regime in Syria, with international pressure for it to be excluded from government, will Hezbollah, do you think, ever be the political force it was again? Has it suffered a mortal blow politically as well as perhaps militarily?
Yeah, indeed, that's a very critical aspect that we should consider. The new Lebanese government's formation, of course, signifies a shift in the balance of power, reflecting a diminished influence for Hezbollah and its coalition, not only Lebanon, but as you mentioned, in the entire Middle East. Hezbollah and its coalition no longer has the blocking third veto power, right? But, however, Hezbollah's political ally, Nabi Berri, still holds significant room of maneuver, while he now primarily seeks to maintain his own personal, individual, and party influence. His capacity as a negotiator, potentially also on Hezbollah's behalf, remains significant. And this suggests that the Hezbollah is operating under increased constraints, but still retains a level of strategic adaptability. And as we've seen on the late days of January, when a popular Shia base close to Hezbollah moved back on the southern regions, this wider Hezbollah Shia community still embodies the so-called esprit de résistance, the resistance mood of opposing Israel with their physical presence along the south. So we should not ignore also the ideological and the cultural deep patterns in this political dynamic.
Elijah, what's going on at the moment within Hezbollah, and what's it going to do with its remaining weapons? With no direct influence in government, could you foresee any circumstances under which Hezbollah might use its weapons internally particularly if it feels that it's been sidelined or isn't getting its way?
Now, first of all, according to my information, Hezbollah still has a large arsenal in Lebanon. However, there is no chance that Hezbollah is going to use these weapons internally or even against Israel at the moment. First of all, this government has a life of 1 year and few months until May 2026. There are new legislation, elections, municipality, etc. This is where Hezbollah needs to duck a little bit and reorganize itself. Secondly, the settlers on the borders on the Israeli side have not returned. Therefore, Hezbollah doesn't have leverage against the Israelis to go on a tit for tat and endanger the Lebanese citizen of the south of Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley. This is why Hezbollah is accepting all the violation of the ceasefire from this Israeli sides, but is more concerned about the reconstruction. Now, Hezbollah cannot direct weapons domestically because there are hundreds of thousands of Shia that support Hezbollah, part of the society, without home. So that is the main concern, and this is why Hezbollah has not been retaliating against the Israeli violations. Secondly, Hezbollah cannot start a war against Israel because it has received a strong hit, need to reform the communication, the location, to understand how much weapon it still has. And above all, that's the most important, the overall strategy of Hezbollah has changed. Is no longer a regional army, but only a domestic resistance. Therefore, the weapon that Hezbollah needs is only related to engaging the Israelis on the borders if Israel remains on the Lebanese territory, but no longer threatening Tel Aviv and other areas in Israel. Therefore, it doesn't need this huge arsenal that it used to have before the beginning of the war at the end of the 2024, when the real hit from Israel started. This reform...
Yeah, David, to what extent will decisions about Hezbollah's military and political power be taken not in Lebanon, but in Iran?
Without a doubt, it's incredibly important, not just what Hezbollah sees as a strategic path forward, but also what Iran's vision is for Hezbollah and its other allies across the region. And I don't think that we'll necessarily know the full answer to that right now, because the big looming question over the entire region is what will the current Trump administration do in relation to Iran? Will it prefer a compromise and trying to reach some kind of deal in relation to nuclear weapons and economic sanctions relief? Or alternatively, will it enter into confrontation? So we've seen mixed messages so far from Trump himself and from Trump officials, with a potential return to maximum pressure in terms of economic sanctions, but also openness to reaching some kind of compromise. And naturally, what Iran sees as its way forward will in turn determine what Iran wants to do with Hezbollah. So if there's a move towards compromising with Iran and de-escalation, then potentially it could support Hezbollah in transitioning away from being a heavily armed militia and further towards being a political actor, a transition, by the way, which has occurred with many Lebanese political parties, which have a history of being armed militias.
Lorenzo, do you agree with that? To what extent is Hezbollah at the mercy of changing power dynamics right across the region right now? Can it remain a dominant political and military force given weakened Iran, Syrian and Russian influence in the region?
Yeah, thank you. I think that even before the last autumn Israeli escalation against Hezbollah, the Party of God, Hezbollah, was never a mere puppet of the Islamic Republic. The interactions, even at individual level, between Ali Khamenei and Hassan Nasrallah were based on a sort of hierarchical but also peer level of discussion. Hassan Nasrallah was one of the few global Shia leaders who could have sat at the table with Ali Khamenei and discuss with him some regional strategic policy. So without Nasrallah, we should not forget that the individual factor is a key asset is a key aspect in this dynamic. Without Hassan Nasrallah at the table, Iran may have more leverage of power, more impact on influencing Hezbollah's decision. But as you already mentioned, Iran itself is on the defensive side now. You need to focus on domestic and negotiation issues with the US and Israel, especially the coming back of the nuclear potential negotiations with Washington. So I don't think that Iran has nowadays the luxury of imposing a new balance of power in Lebanon through Hezbollah. And Hezbollah too, as you already told, is so busy now in trying to reorganize and to contain the damages inflicted by Israel in the last month.
Before we broaden out the discussion, let's just remind you that Lebanon has a unique power sharing system which is designed to balance power among its different communities. The president, who must be a Maronite Christian, serves as head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The prime minister needs to be a Sunni Muslim and runs the government, and the Speaker of Parliament, who has to be a Shia Muslim, leads parliamentary debates and policies, as well as playing a mediator role. But there are two political groups that have always tussled over power. The March 8th coalition, made up of Christian and Shia members, including Hezbollah, well, they usually favour ties with Syria and Iran. And the March 14th coalition, a mixture of Christian and Sunnis who want closer ties with the US, France and Saudi Arabia. Elijah, how does the Shia community in Lebanon feel right now, especially with Hezbollah not playing such an active role in government? Does Hezbollah continue to enjoy the Shia community's support?
Excellent question. More than ever, because they feel threatened when the US envoy from the presidential palace exclude Hezbollah from the political life, which is not translated at the end of the day at the nomination of the government, the new government. And when just before the end of the war, there are politicians coming out in the street and saying we should completely exclude the Shia representative because they still represent 27 MPs at the parliament and they have to be taken into consideration. So the Shia feel threatened by Israel on one side and about domestically all the parties that are close to the US who saying they want to exclude those who represent the majority of the Shia, because Amal and Hezbollah indeed represent the majority of the Shia in Lebanon. So because of that, the more there are voices saying we want to exclude the Shia from the parliament and the government, the more solidarity there are among the population, even if many people were not very happy because of Hezbollah participation and the consequences of the participation in the war in support of Gaza because of the devastating consequences. However, what came afterward brought the community together.
David, a naive question perhaps, but I must ask it. Can Lebanon's complex system of sectarian power-sharing government ever be reworked? Is it still fit for purpose, if indeed it ever was?
Clearly, what we've seen in the past several years, at least since 2019, but in truth before that, is that Lebanon's power sharing system, which was updated really to end the civil war and has subsisted until now, doesn't work. And there is a lot of calls from reform-minded Lebanese to do away with the sectarian system and move to a new system entirely. However, this is very relevant, of course, to what's going on right now, is that we still have the traditional political parties. They have a stranglehold over the parliament, divided along sectarian lines, and they have also had influence over the composition of this government. So this government will face some key challenges, and Elijah has already mentioned several of them, being upholding the ceasefire agreement, which includes the disarmament of Hezbollah, which it calls for, also attracting significant aid for reconstruction. And a third one, which I'd like to add, which is relevant to both, is the economic reform packages which are needed to deal with Lebanon's financial collapse. Now, the thing is, clearly, this new government will need to secure genuine cooperation and good faith cooperation from Hezbollah in relation to implementing the ceasefire agreement. It will need to work alongside Hezbollah and its ally, the Amal movement, in terms of reconstruction aid, which will focus on communities typically aligned with them. Now, let's also remember, though, that Since October 2019, when Lebanon's economic crisis first became apparent, there has been pushback from across all sectarian divides from different vested interests that are not merely aligned with Hezbollah and Amal. Indeed, resisting and blocking economic forms in Lebanon is one of those rare things that actually unites Lebanon's fractious traditional sectarian parties. So for that reason, even if this government has the best intentions, and even if it has, and it does appear to, fantastic technicians in many of these ministries who are very qualified to do their jobs, there needs to be a restoration of trust between the different sectarian parties. Otherwise, I'm afraid the Salam government will not achieve its lofty objectives.
Lorenzo, what's your view on that? Will this new government be able to even fully implement the ceasefire deal? I mean, how on earth do you go about disarming Hezbollah? Will there be pushback on its reform agenda from the other political parties?
Indeed, the Western and the Arab pressures on this issue would be enormous. We are already seeing the U.S. envoy coming to Lebanon and imposing a clear U.S.-Israeli agenda on the government. Imposing a monopoly of violence from the state General Joseph Aoun wants to embody is one of the main challenges of this new government. We should not forget that with elections scheduled next year, time is of the essence for this government. The question is how much this new cabinet can genuinely advance into a transformative process within this contained period of time. And I think that behind the ceasefire issue and the Israeli military ongoing occupation, the main challenge for the government is to setting a transformative process and redefining governance toward inclusive citizen equality horizontally, breaking away from the vertical sectarian division. The two issues, the geopolitical, the relationship between Israel, US, and the Arab Gulf countries, and transforming Lebanon into a more egalitarian, citizen-based governance state are very tied together.
Elijah, is Lebanon's army capable of keeping the peace both internally and externally in terms of manpower, money, skills, political support? And if Israel continues to violate the ceasefire leading up to and beyond February 18th, will Hezbollah retaliate? Is it in a position politically and militarily to do so?
Well, first of all, the army doesn't have the capability to confront Israel by any means. It doesn't have any weapon that can confront the Israelis, doesn't have an air force, doesn't have all the firepower of the Israeli, and is not made for that. Now, internally, the Lebanese army is a source of stability only because the politicians want that. They don't want to go for a domestic war. This is why the army is allowed to perform the job of a police, really, because it has a large number and it exists all over the country, and it has been accepted by the citizen as such. Now, is the retaliation from Hezbollah going to happen? The answer is no, not at the moment, because of the refugees, because of the reconstruction plan, because Hezbollah wants to give a chance to this government to survive for a year and few months, even if the Israeli continue violating the ceasefire. But there is a major problem here, is the translation of this cessation of hostility and the 1701. Is it the limit to the south of the Litani River? This is what Hezbollah understands and claim that it is only limited to the 1701, that is the south of the Litani River. Israel and the US are saying, well, no, it covers the entire country. And this is where the debate that is not going to be resolved by this government. And this government is not going to disarm. Hezbollah doesn't have the means. There is no alternative for that. And the Israelis are not going to pull out from every single centimeter of the Lebanese territory, because this is what the Prime Minister promised.
David, how does the new government go about handling particularly international expectations of it? I'm thinking particularly of the US Deputy Envoy to the Middle East's comments about Hezbollah in particular not being in government last week, to which a Hezbollah spokesman said that was blatant meddling in Lebanese affairs. It's got to walk a tricky line, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It's a very narrow tightrope that Nawaf Salam and now his ministers will need to try to walk, because on the one hand, as you mentioned, there's a lot of international pressure and focus on what's happening in Lebanon, and a real desire for this government to turn a new page and to implement reforms that have proved unimplementable for years, if not decades. But on the other hand, Nawaf Salam needs to maintain a consensus, or some kind of fragile consensus around his government for it to act. I mean, as we were saying before, the reality is that his government on paper doesn't have to face a blocking third, doesn't face the sort of Damocles that potentially the government could collapse at any moment if one single political faction pulls out. But on the other hand, it will need to work not just with the parties that have some influence over the government, but also with the parliament.
Picking up on what David was saying there, can the new government do all of this? Are you optimistic?
I'm mildly optimistic, but again, the elections next year will pose a very great challenge to this government that faces immense socio-economic challenges, notably ensuring access to essential services like healthcare, employment, education for all citizens. That's a vision that both Aoun and Salam already put on the table, but how they could transform this challenge into a golden opportunity to establish a transparent, accountable, and transversal system of redistribution, not only of power, but of services. Okay. I think that is the key issue regarding the Hezbollah and clientelistic scenarios that we are facing since many decades in Lebanon.
There, gentlemen, I'm afraid we are going to end our discussion. Many thanks indeed to all of you. David Wood, Lorenzo Trombetta and Elijah Magnier. Thanks for watching. You can see the programme again at any time just by going to the website. We're at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha, thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.